Hello, cadets. Welcome back to the Research Lab. It's day 2 of Hero Academy, and I, Professor Tina, am so glad you're here today. We get to dive in to God's Word, again, the greatest book of all time, to talk about what it means to have courage, because true heroes have good courage. I've got a story for you today that has courage written all over it. Now, it comes from 1 Samuel chapter 17, and it's about a boy who's about 12 or 13 years old, and his name is David. I'm sure most of you have heard this story, but I'm going to dive deep into it. Cadets, are you ready to go with me? Here we go. Today we have a story that has a giant and a child, and they go head to head together. So let me start in the beginning. The Israel army was up against the Philistine army, and the Philistines were known to be great warriors, but in their army camp, they had a particular huge renowned warrior named Goliath. And Goliath was like no other soldier. He wasn't like this tall. He was 9 feet tall. He was huge. And as they met in the valley to battle, he would come out and mock the Israel army, saying, "You guys can't beat us. You guys are puny," and saying horrible things like that to the Israel army. And the Israel army, the army of God, would shake and tremble in fear. Well, one day, there was a boy named David, and he wanted to visit his older brothers on the line of battle. So he packed up some food and took it to where the armies were camping. And when they were there, David heard this horrible voice, and it was Goliath. He said, "Who is that guy defiling the army of the Lord and the Lord's name?" And everyone's like, "David, that's Goliath. He's their great warrior, and no one can meet him," because they came to an agreement. If anyone would come and defeat the great Philistine warrior Goliath, then the war would be won. And so David said, "How come no one is going up and challenging him?" Because the Israel army was shaking in fear. And he said this, "I will go up and fight him." And he went to the king, who was King Saul at the time, and says, "I'm ready to fight that big giant so he can stop saying bad things about God's army." And the king was like, You're just a child." David had great courage. Even looking at Goliath, before he went into battle with Goliath, his courage was strong. And that courage didn't just come from nowhere. It came from God. David would spend time as a shepherd, and many nights he would spend alone with God, knowing who he is, trusting who he is, knowing that when David is courageous for God, God will never leave him, and God has got his back. And so David said, "Don't worry about me. I know that the Lord is with me, and I can defeat Goliath." So everyone was like, "Well, okay, well, you're just a little child. Here we go." David tried on King Saul's armor, but it was so heavy, he couldn't even stand up from it. So he said, "No, I don't need the armor. I don't need anything. I only need some rocks. And I have one right here." David went down to the riverbed, collected 5 smooth stones, and put them in his belt. He had a slingshot that he was using, and that he did use when he was shepherd to protect his sheep. So he was pretty good with the slingshot. But I don't know, facing a giant, that is scary. But David had good courage. And now comes the time of battle. David comes up to him, and Goliath laughs, saying, "Oh my goodness, you're a child. You mock me with a child? A child can't defeat me." And so David came up to Goliath and said this, "You come at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the army of Israel. And today he will deliver you into my hands." Goliath laughed, and the battle began. As Goliath was approaching David, David gets his rock, places it in his sling, and swings his sling and lets it go, and the rock hits Goliath dead center in the forehead. Goliath didn't even know what hit him. Like a big giant he was, he fell down to the ground with a huge crash. And David defeated Goliath. David was courageous. David knew that it wasn't about him. It was about God using him to defeat this big giant, this great warrior. And everyone saw the Philistine army ran away in fear, and the Israel army, the armies of God, began to cheer and say hooray for David. And friends, David went home as a hero and was treated as a hero as he entered back home. And David was just a child, 13, 12 years old. He was young, maybe some of your ages too, which means you can have courage. You can have courage when you say, God, use me. I want to be a true hero, and a true hero has good courage. Fill me, Lord, with your truth. Fill me with your presence that I may have courage for you. Cadets, today we hear this great story of a warrior and a boy. And because God was in this boy and filled David's heart, David wasn't afraid to face this giant. As a true hero, you will face many giants. But remember, with God, you can have good courage. True heroes have good courage. And cadets, today, you're a little wiser to know that when you leave here, the research lab, you can be courageous for God and be a true hero. I'm so glad you joined me today in the research lab. I'm excited for the rest of the week. I will see you tomorrow, and I can't wait to hear all the stories about how you are having good courage in your life. Thank you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.